You're going to be triple recorded here.
Well, that's fine.
All right. And actually, you might put one down
A
there.
lot of people don't like to be recorded. But I do.
Well, I'd like to introduce Professor Jude Dougherty. He has been 31 years as Dean of the School of Philosophy at the Catholic University of America, 44 years as editor of the Review of Metaphysics, and we were his premier journal in philosophy, and we were talking this morning, and he remarked that someone said, who's in the library, if they could have only one journal, that would be the journal. So he has written several books, about 10, I think, at last count. The books have a wide range. Logic of Religion. He's written several things on Aristotle, including one with the title Wretched Aristotle. Of course, the one that he's going to discuss today. His works have been translated into Italian, German, Romanian. And there is one work that's in German that hasn't been translated into English, and I won't attempt the German pronunciation, the title, but it deals with social and political philosophy.
Religion, Gesellschaft, democracy.
Okay, all right, good. So, Professor Dougherty.
Well, you've heard about what I have written. A couple days ago, I ran across a quotation from Francois Mauriac, the French novelist. I don't know whether he's still read, but somebody was quoting him as saying, "Tell me what you have read, and I'll tell you what you are." Well, let me tell you what I read and led to those books that you heard about. I began as a high school student by reading Marx, Karl Marx. Freshman year, I read Plato. Then went on to, somehow or another, I discovered Thomas Aquinas. And Thomas Aquinas led me to Aristotle. Thomas is a noted commentator on Aristotle. So my career was pretty much shaped by that early reading. And at some point, it dawned on me that people don't know what religion is any more than they know what science is. So, well, back again to both Aquinas and Aristotle, who thought you had to be about 50 years old before you could really do metaphysics. The Logic of Religion has done very well. That's one of the works that's been translated into Italian and into Romanian. But people don't know what science is. I mean, everybody believes in science. If they don't believe in anything else, they believe that science is somehow or another it. The logic of, the nature of scientific explanation, there are a few things. I mean, you supposedly had the text. There are a few things that we must talk about. And first is the nature of abstraction. Plato told us that all science is of the universal. There is a kind of abstraction that enables you to go in natural science from an examination of a particular that enables you to say something about the universal from that knowledge of a particular or a process. Example, copper conducts electricity. Now, you don't have to experience more than one instance of copper conducting electricity to know that that's universally true. Copper has a nature. It has a structure. If you're steeped in, well, let's say you remember the periodic table, you can probably tell me its configuration. That is basic to science. All science is of the universal, to quote Plato again. There is another level of abstraction where you leave behind all features of a thing except its quantity, number. I have before me 3 cell phones of one sort or another. And from that, I can talk about 3. There's leaving behind, in that instance, there's leaving behind everything, figure, shape, color, focusing only on number. And then there is the kind of abstraction that I think Aristotle and Aquinas had in mind, the kind that we call metaphysical, where you leave behind everything and consider only what the entity has in common with the whole of reality. It's at that third degree of abstraction that you acquire the notion of being. And then you can begin to understand the properties of being. Being is larger than the being of nature. Being incorporates both immaterial as well as the material. That's, I think, an important point to begin with. Then there is, well, what is scientific explanation? It's an attempt to render intelligible something that is not intelligible in itself. Now, in that book, I give the example of Madame Curie reasoning that something was going on there that nobody had encountered before. I explained before. It eventually cost her husband's life, her life. We have reason to the existence of bacteria before they were discernible by a microscope. We have reason to the existence of atoms, to the existence of molecules. One example that I like is when Fermi reasoned that there was a particle as yet undiscovered called the neutrino. And he needed that particle to make sense of his theory of beta decay. He was subject to a lot of, well, cynical comment. Colleagues called it, he was looking for his poltergeist. It was eventually encountered by a client, Callan, at a laboratory somewhere in Oregon and then again at Savannah River. And Fermi had already called it, in his Italian language, neutrino, little one. Well, the little one was reasoned to before there was any evidence for its existence. It had to be there. Now that's what is called demonstration. An explanation of something that doesn't explain itself. Now, behind all that is the Aristotelian concept of four causes. You've probably encountered them. The four causes: matter, form, efficient, and final. The matter is what is organized by a form. A form is a unifying principle. The form of a living thing is called a soul. Plants, animals, and man have souls. The soul is the unifying principle of this matter that exists as a whole, as a unit. There's nothing mysterious with that concept of soul. So every material thing has matter and form. But how did it come to be? Then you look for the making cause. Efficient, I think, is from the Latin, to make. You have to bring about. I mean, these gadgets we have here didn't bring themselves about. Now, to explain them, you can explain it in chemical terms, physical terms, but you, in order to know, you didn't have that when I was a student. Probably didn't have it when you were born. Most of that is recent. So you go looking, why does it happen the way it does? So you're still looking for a search in the order of what made it come to be. Now, the final cause is another name for purpose. The thing is designed in the light of its purpose. Now, that's a problem for many of our it's a problem for those who are not willing to recognize that nature is ordered. You have certainly heard natural law arguments. Well, Socrates made the most of many of them. Act according to nature. Whose nature? Your nature. Well, what do you know about your nature? There are certain built-in drives. You're curious. You desire knowledge. You may desire affection. You may desire success. The purpose of anything becomes a problem for those who want to reduce everything to purely material explanation. Now, there's no scientist, natural scientist, who is willing to deny order in nature. Things, human body, organs are purposive with respect to the whole. There is certainly an order that can't be denied. But with human beings, with animals, with nature's order. How did it come about? Are you willing to admit that, the universe has been designed? You're willing to admit that there is an external force responsible for the order of nature. And here we look at Aristotle's final cause. We look at Plato's summum bonum. We explain the material order by an immaterial order. Plato's summum bonum, highest good, diffusive of itself, responsible for other goods. With Aristotle, you have a prime mover, a first efficient cause, a cause of the existence of the nature of things. So you have, on the part of the materialist, a denial of finality, a denial of purpose in nature. Does that hold up? Well, it held up for countless hundreds of years, for thousands of years, until Darwin came up with an explanation. Well, it really wasn't Darwin, it was Wallace. Descent with modification. Mankind has evolved from ape-like ancestors, if you will. That has created a lot of problems for a lot of people. It comes down to, again, the metaphysical assumption that you can reason to an order of reality that's wider than the being of nature. That's another point we might want to discuss. There are a few other points that I took note of, and let me see if I've missed something that you may. Well, I talk a lot about Hume, and I talk a lot about Locke. With Hume, it's the principle of causality. Can we really render intelligible something that doesn't explain itself? Is there such a thing as a cause responsible for an effect? Or is it that when we see two things conjoined, we, by virtue of habit, identify one as cause and the other as effect? On Hume's principle, you cannot argue to an immaterial order. You cannot even have science. Science becomes description and prediction. And I think that's an important point, that if all you can do is describe, and on the basis of what you've encountered before, predict, that's reducing science to description and prediction. That's contrary to what I've been affirming, that science renders intelligible that which is not intelligible in terms of itself. And with Locke, you have, we were talking about human nature, or you can talk about the nature of anything. Go back to copper, if you will. It's a question of, are there substances, are there natures, essences that are discernible by the human intellect? And with that goes the notion that the human intellect is powerful enough to determine the nature of things. So it's a question of what can be known and what is known. Now with Locke, the object that we call a substance or a nature is a constellation of events. We can't name everything that designates, let's say, Fido, the dog. So we call it a dog, but by a dog we mean this and that, and list all the features. We can't list all the features at once. So to make life easier, we just refer to that bundle of features as a dog, that bundle of features as hydrochloric acid, or that bundle of features as a daffodil. Now, is there such thing as a daffodil? Is there such a thing as a dog? I mean, normally we don't question that, but philosophers, Locke and other materialists do in fact question that. That's something else you might want to explore. I began by talking about the abstractive power of intellect. To abstract to the object of natural science, the ability to abstract to mathematics, arithmetic, geometry, and all the complicated mathematical systems that come out of that recognition, and the ability to abstract to the concept of being, the notion that material reality can be wider, that reality can be wider than simply material reality. I didn't tell you about the rest of my intellectual journey. I mentioned that I started with Marx and then went to Plato, somewhere along the line discovered Aquinas and Aristotle. And I didn't mention that I wrote my master's thesis on Benedetto Croce, known for his theory of history, and my doctoral dissertation was on John Dewey and his school, which at the time that I wrote, I was investigating what was going on at New York University and Columbia University for the most part. And my doctoral dissertation was a critical examination. Later, I got to know a lot of those people that I wrote my doctoral dissertation on. When I became dean, I had them in. I wanted our own graduate students to confront in the flesh something that I only read about. It took me 10 years to write that, but it's still out there. The first book I published was Recent American Naturalism. And I was amazed one time when I found it in New York University Library. Well, no. Yeah, New York City Public Library. It may still be around somewhere. Well, I'm beginning to talk about myself. We want to talk about some of these issues, anything that's on your mind that I might be able to address. I may address it well, maybe not. You can challenge me and correct me if I'm wrong about anything. So, shoot. Please.
So these three kinds of abstraction, are they levels of abstraction?
3
So
degrees
they
we've
have
identified.
Okay.
3 degrees of abstraction.
Uh-huh.
A good source on that is Jacques Maritain. But you find it in Aristotle, of course. But you need, Aristotle, you need a tutor. I mean, you just can't pick up, well, you can read the politics and the ethics, but the metaphysics is difficult. As a matter of fact, I think it was Avicenna, Ibn Sina, the Persian philosopher, who said he had read it 33 times without understanding it. And he only came to understand it when he committed it to memory. He was writing, 11th century. And what must also be noted, if there was, Aristotle was missing for probably a century before his basic works were uncovered. They were uncovered and began to be translated first into the Syriac, and from the Syriac into the Arabic, from the Arabic back into Latin, back into Greek, and finally Latin. But the Western canon includes at least a half a dozen, well, maybe many more, but very prominent Islamic scholars that are part and parcel of the Aristotelian development in the West. It was not until the 12th century that Aristotle reached the Latin West. It had been known in the East, largely due to the Syriac translations that were brought into being as a result of Islamic masters trying to understand a lot of classical learning was actually preserved by Islam. You can think of Al-Farabi, Avicenna, Maimonides, Al-Kindi. So in my student years, our course in Arabic philosophy was almost compulsory. I studied under a Polish scholar, Arabic philosophy. And that began another chapter. So again, what you've read, tell me what you've read, and I tell you what you are. And if you haven't read very much, you're in trouble, especially in these days, when Western civilization itself seems to be on its way out. So,
You have a good start. They read some Plato last session. Most of it. And of course, Kyle has been studying in Oxford. This is Kyle Perez.
what college?
St. Catherine's.
Well, Oxford, Cambridge, are the places to go for history, Oxford especially. Cambridge more or less on the science side, Oxford on the political, religious, social.
Cole, do you have a question?
Sure. So up to this point, you've spoken a lot about Aristotle, and even just in this excerpt that we were given of the nature of scientific explanation, I think I counted on 9 pages, I think, you have 28 references either just to Aristotle or Aristotelian view on metaphysics and the nature of scientific explanation. So clearly, his work has had a great impact on what
Well,
you've
it's
written.
relevant. You can lead a decent life. based on Aristotle's ethics and politics. I mean, the situation hadn't changed. If you get into Aristotle's politics, you would think he was writing as a contemporary. Human nature doesn't change. Human nature is confronted with the same problems today as it was in antiquity. The political, there are only so many ways you can organize a society. Now, we spent a lot of time preaching diversity. Well, there hadn't been anybody in the history of philosophy who has been in favor of diversity until, recent decades, mainly in this country. Diversity, unity is the important factor. I mean, you don't have a society unless you have something unifying it. And for the most part, through history, it's been a religion of one sort or another. Rulers from the very early centuries of our period recognized that. Diversity, how do you handle? How can you bring people together if they don't have anything in common? If they don't have anything in common, you don't have a society. Well, I could go on like that. I've written a lot. And if you plug my name in, you'll get maybe 70,000 hits. Hardly any social topic I haven't at some point addressed. Doesn't mean I did it well or authoritatively, but I found these topics interesting. And I hope you find them interesting too as you gain some leisure. Please.
If you would recommend one of your books to read that would be the most enlightening, which one would you say would be best for starting? Because it's my first philosophy class.
I would maybe begin, you didn't mention, we didn't even talk about it, I forgot about it. Western Creed, Western
that's right.
Identity.
That's very good.
Western Creed, Western Identity. Now, let me recommend a couple other guys. Remy Brague, Brague, Pierre Manent, both contemporary French philosophers, both are members of the French Academy. They have been writing on this subject. Pierre Manent, Remy Brague. You can get them maybe for $15, $20. They ought to be part of your library. I have found that one way to keep current, there's no need for me to be current, but again, Aristotle was right. You desire to know. I find myself reviewing a lot of books. And to write a book review, you've got to read it. It compels you. Otherwise, somebody will pick up and say, Dougherty, you idiot, how could you say something like that? I have on order, as a matter of fact, 2 books now from Oxford, The Philosophy of Science. Find out, what's going on in the minds of many right now. That's good self-discipline, to buy a book and read it. You mean, well, my wife doesn't want me to bring another book home. There are books all over the house. Thousands. Doesn't mean I've mastered all of them, There was one book that I experienced a particular delight in reading. And I don't know how far along you've gotten in your studies, but for one course, I had to master Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. Well, I sweated, outlined it, tried to understand what was going on, and finally I thought I had it. And I really felt emotional about it. And I don't think I've felt that way about any book since. But now Kant, talking about him, he denied the possibility of metaphysics. But he did need God. He needed God to make sense of the ethical life. If there's not an afterlife where the good are rewarded and the evil punished, morality doesn't make any sense. You need what we're calling a natural order of things. Kant would not allow natural law, but he nevertheless needed it as a postulate in order to have science. I mean, you got to postulate what you can't prove. So my reading of Kant, much later on, became important as I interpreted modern philosophy. The modernity began probably in the 18th century. Up until that time, Aristotle ruled. Now, there are many who failed to distinguish between Aristotle as a philosopher and his scientific speculations. I mean, he knew all the science that was known at that period. And from modernity, or from subsequent centuries, that, became absurd. Some date modernity to Copernicus or to Galileo, but I think it really begins with British empiricism. And it's Hume who awakened Kant from his dogmatic slumber. Kant says that of himself. What did Hume do that awakened Kant? His theory of causality, that you couldn't reason from effect to cause. All you could do was describe.
Do modern scientists still have to observe the Aristotelian approach?
Every physicist I've known is a dyed-in-the-wool Aristotelian, whether they know it or not. One of my classmates, we went through junior college, university together. And he later became a prominent physicist. And I've known over the years a number of theoretical physicists. And like most German physicists, they stay away from philosophy. They don't want to, as it were, satisfy philosophers in their own language. They don't try to reconcile physics and philosophy. But the philosophers I have known, all of them theoretical physicists. I come from a university that didn't have huge amounts of equipment, but they could do a lot of things on pencil and paper. Theoretical physics was the physics that was available to me as an undergraduate. And it was the Aristotelian or the scholastic system of thought that was compatible with what they were doing. One of my classmates, we both got out at the same time, I have the PhD. His first job was Princeton. Second job, chairman at Vanderbilt. Now, what these gentlemen that, I could name a number of others, what they had in common over and above their scientific training was a classical education. We could argue over, a bridge game. The deepest metaphysical problems you could think of. And the physicists were at home in Aristotle as they were in the laboratory. But it was the liberal back or classic education, if you will, that gives you a kind of superiority over servile type work. Corporate world is servile. As a youngster, I thought I could be anything I wanted to be, but I knew I didn't want to work for anybody. And even though, I was a professor and had to meet classes, I never felt I was working for anybody. I don't know whether you share that.
I share it. Yeah,
Yeah.
share it. I share it.
Because to teach, you gotta know. You gotta know something. And I often wonder if my teaching had corrupted anybody. But occasionally, years
Socrates.
went by, people, and they still do. I mean, they may not have had me around for 25, 30 years. They still remember some things. I remember once talking about, there is, within the scholastic tradition, wherever you can say being, you can say a number of other things, like unity. A thing must preserve its unity to preserve its being. You can talk about beauty. Thing is capable of attracting. You can talk about a number of other things that the whole of reality has in common. And it's on the basis of that you can predicate anything of God. I lost train of thought there for a minute. An older student, much older than any of you here, came up to me and he said, that lecture on unity, unum, in Latin, really made an impression on me. And he says, as a result of that, I am making more money than I ever made before because my business had 3 plants and I brought them all together and it cut down on overhead. So
That's
I don't
a
know if they
servile
contributed
calculation.
to the fundraising in my college or not.
Right.
Yes.
I have a question. So I'm a biology major, and a lot of our, the professors that I interact with deny, anything being beyond the scientific and what's experimentally proven, and a lot of times they hold the view that, it makes you, lesser, if you believe in something beyond that, they kind of hold, a connotation. So what's, a good way, if they, were to confront me with, a comment like a negative comment about believing beyond, like how would you address that?
Good question.
Well, no philosopher of note has ever offered proof of the non-existence of God. You just can't prove it. And you can't prove either that material reality is the whole of reality. That's an assumption, just like evolution. Evolution is nonsense. It doesn't make sense. It's a hypothesis, nothing more than that. But it's accepted. Now, why? Well, Nietzsche has a role to play here. If God is dead, everything is permitted. And my friend McInerney would say it's all about sex. If there is no order to which you should adhere, free reign. So there is an outside, well, I don't know how to put it exactly. There are positions that people adopt are either out of ignorance or maybe because they don't want to behave.
I'm wondering if somebody can get so caught up in their discipline and the history of the discipline that they have a difficult time getting away from that, to change the paradigm that they've been using all this time.
In this area, so many lies told repeatedly. A good book that I just finished. Now, I don't know whether any of you have read any of Tom Wolfe. He's a novelist, cynic. It just came out. You can buy it for $15. I did on Amazon. I'm trying to remember the title. It has language in the title. He's very much interested in language. And the evolutionists have never figured out how human language could evolve. And they admit it. But there is hope that sometime in the future they may be able to explain what they cannot explain now. I wrote a little essay, you probably find it somewhere within the last year or so. It takes a lot of faith to be an atheist, because you don't have the answers, but you're convinced that one day the answer will be, and it will be thoroughly materialistic. You can have fun doing philosophy.
So the assumption is that evolution is incompatible with the existence of God?
There's no evidence for evolution. Nobody has ever demonstrated evolution. It's an hypothesis, and Tom Wolfe really makes fun of it as an hypothesis, mainly because you need to explain human language. And there's nothing in ape-like ancestors that resembles human language. Human language just appears on the scene. It's an artifact.
Thank you.
Well, yeah. So,
Question?
have I run over time?
No, we have 10 more minutes, and here's another question here.
How many more minutes?
10 more minutes, and here's
Okay.
another question from
Yeah, I
Kyle.
don't want to cop out if you want to go after me on
No,
something.
we're going to keep you going.
How would you respond to someone drawing an equivalence between the formal cause of reality and God as both provision and order? Do you think they would be able to both sustain the same roles in Kant's philosophy as well as it could in Aristotelian philosophy?
Well, I would try to rearrange that question a little bit. You can talk about God as the existence, God as the cause of the existence of things. It's the things that would have material and formal causality, if they're material. So, in the scholastic tradition, God is presented as the cause of the existence of things. Now, you may have heard of St. Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways. Now, Thomas is a theologian, but he's also a commentator on Aristotle, and as well as a philosopher. The 5 ways Thomas reasons in an Aristotelian manner to the first efficient cause of nature, of reality, whom all men call God, or whom men call God. He reasons to the prime mover, and then says that men call God. But there's no explanation for God. God comes as an explanation of things. And it's only things that would be composed. With God, you're dealing with a pure intelligence, no composition whatsoever. I think Kant would call him ens realissimum.
God, we follow up on that. You were about to follow up on that?
I'm not sure how far off topic we would be getting by bringing Heidegger into this. But
well, there's let me tell you a Heidegger story. My friend Tom Langen, now deceased, wrote the first book in English language on Heidegger. I actually have that book at bedside today. It's a very difficult book. It's not a very good book. I'm not recommending it. Tom himself got a lot of bad reviews when he wrote that book. He was studying at the Institut Catholique in Paris and became acquainted with Heidegger there. Heidegger is somebody that is important to crack, to see what he's about. But the story I'm wanting to tell is that Langen was trying to get out of Canada to come to the States. As a matter of fact, I think he was coming at my invitation. He was at the University of Toronto. And when he got to passport control, the attendant looked at Tom, looked at his passport. Tom, passport, Tom. Tom was getting nervous, and finally the official said, "Did you write that book on Heidegger?" Now, Tom knew that it was badly reviewed, and that the guy may have had it in for him or so. But I haven't studied at length Heidegger, but he pops up all the time. You get into the phenomenological movement, you get into Gadamer. I mean, there are references to Heidegger all over the place. So I'm not going to say, I mean, you can't say of most philosophers good and bad. You can say they're wrong, but, and there isn't anything you need fear knowing about. I mean, if you're steeped in the Aristotelian tradition, you can handle anything. But that's not the case with a lot of other traditions. Langham is also, we might be engaged in, we would be discussing something. It might be Heidegger, it might be, Dougherty, you idiot, how can you say those things? Well, having established my credentials, then we would get down to business. Yeah, lifelong friend.
I maybe have to tell a little story about Heidegger in respect to Dr. Dougherty. About, if I may, about 7 years ago, so somewhere around there, we were at a conference together, and everything I had read of Heidegger, I disliked intensely. I hated it. And so we were talking, and I was running down Heidegger, and he said, well, you know, there's more to Heidegger than you might think. And then we had Saulius Genasis. I don't know if you knew him, but he was here. He taught one course on truth and method, Gadamer's Truth and Method, and I sat in on that. And then he gathered a group of the best students from there, and we read, he allowed me to come. We met at his home, and we read through Being and Time. And I assure you, his indication was worth a lot. You know, that Heidegger, I appreciate many of the things. And of course, Gadamer was so influenced by him. So we will talk. I didn't know you had an interest in Heidegger.
Yeah,
we will talk.
Yeah, but you got to begin with Husserl.
With Husserl.
Yeah, to understand Gadamer and to understand Heidegger and many others. The phenomenological movement is something you have to, as it were, take seriously. It's not metaphysics. It's maybe laying the foundation insofar as it's descriptive. You put aside all previous notions, you bracket the subject, you consider from every angle. Matter of fact, I think that book that you have there, the chapter, is dedicated to my colleague Robert Sokolowski, who is a phenomenologist. And he and I differ as to the nature of philosophy, and we've spent 40 some odd years together. His philosophy is the art of making distinctions. Well, that comes out of his phenomenological background. I argue, as I've argued today, philosophy is at its best metaphysics in the classical tradition. And again, that classical tradition includes a lot of errors. Okay. Well, thank you. I hope you've got something out of this. But buy books as a student. Well, I shouldn't, but you know, I went without meals to buy books. And it may be necessary today, I don't know. No. Well, thanks for coming.
Thank you very much.
I must say I have been under the same decision, and I usually choose books.
All right. Well, there's a person who taught at Georgetown who's a friend of Dr. Dougherty. He's been here visiting many times. His name is Father Shaw, who's in political theory, and he said, when you die, there should be books on your shelf that you have never read.
Oh.
So, thank you very much.